Over the past generation, the U.S. has become one of the biggest debtor nations, owing more than $17 trillion. This Citizen Tools video looks at what the federal debt is. There are two general kinds of debt. There's what's called government debt, which are Treasury securities, or IOUs, issued to various government trust funds. At the end of 2013, this debt stood at $5 trillion. Then there is debt held by the public, the debt held in the form of government stocks, bonds, and other investments from outside the federal government, including international and domestic investors, the Federal Reserve, and state and local governments. This public debt stood at $12.36 trillion in December of 2013. 57% of government debt is held by Social Security, 17% by government workers as retirement and disability, 12% by military retirements and healthcare, 8% by other programs and trusts, and 6% belongs to Medicare. Then there is the bigger chunk of the debt held by the public. 48% of public debt is held by international investors. 31% is held by domestic private investors. 15% is held by the Federal Reserve, and 6% is held by state and by local governments. The U.S. government has carried public debt throughout its history, initially to finance the Revolutionary War. Debt held by the public has generally risen during times of war, during the Civil War, World War I and II, the Persian Gulf War, and the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, as well as during recessions. Part of the reason public debt is so high today is because the U.S. is both in a recession and coming out of decades of Middle East wars. But what about the debt limit? The debt limit or debt ceiling is the total amount of money the U.S. government is authorized to borrow to meet its existing legal obligations, including Social Security benefits, military salaries, tax refunds, interest on all debt, and Medicare benefits, as well as any other payments. The debt limit allows the government to finance existing legal obligations that Congresses and presidents of both parties have made in the past. Failing to increase the debt limit would cause the government to default on its legal obligations and prevent it from undertaking new operations. Thus, since 1940, Congress has acted 95 times to raise, extend, or revise the definition of the debt limit. In fact, the debt limit has been raised almost every year since its creation in 1939, and sometimes it's been raised several times in a single year. Some economists argue there should be less political attention on the debt ceiling and more on what's called federal unfunded liabilities. Federal unfunded liabilities are projected future debt. Social Security and Medicare are the federal government's two biggest unfunded liabilities. Over the next 75 years, Social Security is expected to add $9.6 trillion to the debt. Medicare is expected to add $27.2 trillion. But taken as a percentage of the country's output or gross domestic product, unfunded liabilities come to just under 4% of GDP for that time period. So is the U.S. debt really so bad? Is there a tipping point which puts the U.S. and the world in danger? How have other countries reduced their debt? And how can we reduce our own debt? To find out the answers to these and other questions, watch other Citizen Tools videos in this series. Citizen Tools is a nonpartisan, nonprofit resource that provides data-rich facts and analyses about economic, political, and social trade-offs facing the United States.